Gill in the house. It's a big week for 97.3 The Sports Bash, as well as they will be in Arizona this week. Mike Gill, are you excited for your trip?
Sure. I've never been to Arizona before. I'm looking forward to it. I've been to Radio Row a bunch of times. It's a very, very hectic whirlwind of a week. It'll move fast, man. It definitely moves.
How long are you going to be there?
I'm leaving tomorrow. I am doing shows on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So, I'll be out there about 3 days. You got the good flight tomorrow, though. We're not flying until tomorrow night. So I'm missing all of Tuesday. We're not getting in until 10 o'clock tomorrow night.
Oh, man, that's not going to be fun for you when you got to do a show. What? Oh, I guess it would be noon, in Mountain Time, right?
Yeah, we're 12 to 4. We're 2 to 6 here in the East, so 12 to 4 out there on Mountain. But as you're trying to put together your guest schedule and people are sending you the time thing is all messed up. So, trying to constantly doing the conversion. I've been living on Mountain Time for like the last 2 weeks because I keep getting emails for like, hey, do you want to talk to Zach Ertz and his wife? These are the times he's available. Wait, what? I'm not on the air at 11. Oh, wait, maybe I am.
Yeah, no, that's how I've been too. So I've had people reach out to me. Oh, you want to talk to Donovan McNabb? You want to talk to Brian Westbrook? I'm like, I do, but you guys do know I got like practices to cover, and I got obligations to you and to John Kincaid and a bunch of other people. It's I have to write down everything I'm actually doing, or else I'm gonna double book.
I have a spreadsheet right now going, and it is all over the place with times and potential times and people I have to record with and people that are live. And remember, I do the show. I do a couple podcasts. So some people are for the podcast, some people are for the show. It's one of those weeks. But hey, we're trying to pump out content for the people. Hopefully they appreciate it.
That's how I am too. And it's funny going down there covering both teams and knowing both teams as well as I do. I literally had to mess with the Chiefs and say, you guys really have to practice in the morning. You guys are available in the morning.
I was going to say, when are the Eagles practice? I haven't seen that yet because Scott Grayson is coming with us. He's always part of our Radio Row team, and he goes usually to when the Eagles were in Minnesota, he went to their practices, but the practices were pretty much on site at the Mall of America because the two teams were staying out that way.
Yeah, so this is what I was told. Obviously, I know who the pool reporters are who will actually get to see all of the practice. I don't even know we're allowed to even get to see the practices, but before and after practice, I think people are available. And the Eagles are at the Cardinals facility, and the Chiefs are at Arizona State. So it's an advantage. The Eagles are the designated home team. Everything for them is in the afternoon. So I think it's after your show.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I did see that the Eagles were at Arizona Cardinals practice facility and the Chiefs were at Arizona State. I did see that. I just didn't know what times. But, yeah, it should be a fun week. I mean, obviously, now we're in the week. The storylines get going, and both teams have touched down.
It is funny, though, how there's still a lingering storyline that happened 8 days ago. And we shouldn't be talking about this, but man, how many people on the 49ers are bitter that the Eagles just kicked the living you-know-what out of them?
Yeah, those Brandon Ayuk's comments were just I don't get it, man. And this is one of those things we talk about, leading up to this game. It's like if you have a preconceived notion of what the Eagles were going to be this year, you're probably one of those people that just can't come to terms with this team is really good. You're that guy that will constantly say, well, they didn't beat anybody and the schedule was weak and they had an easy path. And if the Niners had Purdy, the game would have been different. You're finding ways to try to tell yourself that this team isn't really good. I got bad news for those people. This team is really good. And I asked the question last week. I'll ask it again. If you're one of those people like Brandon Ayuk, what is it about this team? And he said, okay, we think if we would have had our full game plan, we would have been able to exploit them on defense. I'm not so sure about that. I think Brandon Ayuk has a little bit too much faith in Brock Purdy's ability and what they could do. But hey, look, that's much like we saw from Julian Love and Jerry Jones, just bitter people who were saying things because they don't like the result of what's happening right now. The Eagles are just better than the Giants. They're better than the Cowboys. And we saw that they're better than the 49ers. So these are the results.
And all three of those teams are scrambling to figure out how they could beat the Eagles. And the only way they can hope right now is if the Eagles don't retain everybody, which is they're not going to. But my issue with the Ayuk thing is, and again, the guy who first put out the comments was from the 49ers All-Nation team for Sports Illustrated, same company where Ed Kratz and McMullen write for. He's very pro 49ers. He's a big homer, and he said, look, this kind of mentality is why they got beat badly in the NFC Championship game. And they said it's coming from somewhere. So it's either the players or the coaches. They seriously thought they were just going to walk in there and beat them.
Well, yeah, and again, it's like you have this preconceived. I look at it like the Bengals last year. I don't know how many people thought the Bengals were going to go to the Super Bowl. They made the playoffs, and you're just like, it's the Bengals. Like, I think I fell into that trap. It's like they're the Bengals. Like, the franchise is just down rotten. They can't be good. So you don't believe in them. They have to do something to prove to you that you can believe in them. I think the Bengals winning 3 road games last year and getting to you can be like, okay, I think this Bengals team is legitimate now. And then this year, I think many people saw and believed that they weren't only legitimate, that they were maybe the best team in the league. So it takes something for many people to change their opinion when it comes to a team that was not preconceived to be something. Those outliers are hard to believe in, right? When we see them all the time, I talk about like the Atlanta Hawks a bunch of years ago had 60 wins in the NBA, and we're like, they're the Atlanta Hawks. I don't believe in them at all. And normally those teams don't give you a reason to believe in them. The Hawks get knocked out in the second round, and it's like, I never believed in that team anyway. So the Eagles are kind of on. It's not that they don't have a history enough to prove it. It's that I think entering the year, the Jalen Hurts question was so big, and he took such a big step that a lot of people, and many people like a 49ers fan or a Giants fan or a Cowboys fan or whoever you're a fan of, don't watch them every single week. The Eagles were on prime time a handful of times, but if you didn't watch them every single week, you've got a hodgepodge opinion of what kind of step you saw from Jalen Hurts. You really had to watch him the full resume to say, man, this guy's not the same player he was last year. And I think that's where, a lot of football fans who don't see a team every week formulate an opinion based on the few times that they see a team.
Well, it was like when I tweeted out the stat where if the Eagles win the Super Bowl, they're going to tie the Patriots for the most wins against winning teams of the season. And someone decided to say, well, you act like the Steelers are good. You act like this team is good. I'm like, they had a winning record. That was the stat. Like, what part of this is hard to understand?
I said it all year. Everybody said you didn't play anybody. And I said, there's nobody to play. You could have beaten whoever the person who's saying that wanted you to beat. And you would say, well, that team's not any good. I agree. I didn't think Minnesota was a team that was a threat. They won 13 games this year. They're not any good. Well, I'm not saying they were, but who was? What team would you have beaten that would have gained? And there's really 2 or 3 teams. If the Eagles would have beaten Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati. I mean, Dallas beat Cincinnati, but it was all the way back in week 2. And at that point, people were like, oh, maybe this Cincinnati team is going back to the Bengals. Well, it turned out they turned into a pretty good team. So then it turns into, well, you beat Cincinnati early in the year. It didn't really matter when so everybody moves the goalpost constantly. The point of it was there was no teams to beat. If everybody had about 1 or 2 games on their schedule, and Philadelphia beat Minnesota. They had the game against Dallas early. Well, of course, Dak didn't play. Well, okay, they didn't. Well, Dak's gone. Minnesota's out. and Philadelphia is still here. So quite frankly, in the end, who the hell cares who you beat on the way to get here, as long as you're still standing when it matters the most?
What upset me was when people were saying the Eagles had an easy path to go to the Super Bowl. I'm like, well, hold on a second. That's why you're the number 1 seed.
You earned that.
Yeah, you earned that. Like, you earned the right to play the New York Giants in the divisional round. I'm sorry the Minnesota Vikings couldn't hold up their end of the bargain, so the 49ers would have had the easier path. No, that's not how it works.
If Dallas does their job, they had a game where they played Jacksonville. They lost. Philadelphia played Jacksonville. They won. Dallas had a chance to beat Philadelphia early in the year. They lost that game. Just think, there's 2 games right there that if those games outcomes are different, Dallas gets to play the Giants and then gets to play San Francisco. Guess what, Dallas? You played San Francisco and you lost. I mean, Philadelphia, well, they knocked Brock Purdy out of the game. You had that opportunity too. You could have had a chance to do that. You didn't get the job done. So every single road points to Philadelphia was simply the best team. That's why over 17 games, they were the number 1. Now, early in the year, San Francisco had a bunch of injury issues. They lost to Denver 11-10. Listen, you have injury issues, but losing to Denver, I don't care. If you're a real contender, San Francisco has a chance to win that game. They lost. They lost to Atlanta. Really? They lost to Chicago. I can understand if you had injury issues and you were losing to Minnesota and Dallas and, they got beat by 3 teams that weren't close to playoff worthy. If they find a way to win one of those games, they get the number 1 seed. They didn't. So therefore, the game had to be in Philadelphia and the crowd was raucous and the place got going. So everything that happens set up that Philadelphia over the 17 games was the better team. And we're seeing that. And we saw it most of this season. Really, when Jalen Hurts played, they were by far the best team. And quite frankly, I think you're going to see that again. Like, I look at this game and I see a mismatch. I just think people don't want to believe what they're seeing. This is a mismatch. Philadelphia's 53-man roster is flat out better, deeper, and stronger than Kansas City. Now, they have Patrick Mahomes. That certainly closes the gap more than Brock Purdy closed the gap. I thought Philadelphia had a better roster, but closer. I think San Francisco's roster is better than Kansas City's, but they have a huge gap at quarterback. And obviously, the gap between Philadelphia and New York is outrageous. This here, I think Philadelphia and Kansas City, I think the gap is wider than it was for Philadelphia, San Francisco. How much does Mahomes close that gap is the question.
I think this is why I was a big believer in Kansas City throughout the year. I know how good their offensive line is. Is it as good as the Eagles? No, but it's a very good offensive line. They've had 3 Pro Bowl. Their weakness is Andrew Wiley, which I think is what the Eagles are going to expose. And their defensive line got better during the year. They had 55 sacks. They were top 7 in pressures. They get to the quarterback. That's why I thought Kansas City was going to make another D run in the playoffs. Oh, and they also have this quarterback named Patrick Mahomes, and they probably had the greatest tight end ever, who's on his way to be anyway, and Travis Kelce. But I agree with you. I think where the big mismatch is, and Tony and I were talking about this too, it's the Eagles wide receivers versus the Chiefs secondary. It's a young secondary. It has the opportunity to be very good. But as you know, from watching Jim Johnson, from watching Steve Spagnuolo, he could have his 2001, 2002 Eagles secondary back there. They're going to get beat if they don't get home.
Yep, big time. Big mismatch is in that secondary. They are very prone, again, like San Francisco, to the big play. Last week, the big play was there. Hurts didn't connect on it. That was the issue. The play was there, but they didn't connect on it. Can Hurts connect on that ball this time around? That's going to be big. Conversely, I don't think that Kansas City's wide receivers scare your secondary all that much. So that should give John Gannon the ability to do some more things because he shouldn't think that those guys are going to get behind him. They don't have a lot of playmakers with Juju if he plays, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Those guys are not guys who are going to really scare you. The guy is Kelce. But because you don't have to worry on the outside as much, can you put more attention on Kelce? I'll be interested to see, because you're right, they have a pretty good offensive line, how much pressure Philadelphia will be getting. But the big mismatch, of course, is Reddick has the 1 weak spot in their lineup with Wiley. So how do they kind of figure out a way to help him out? Because they're pretty good in the other 4 spots.
Yeah. Chiefs fans say that they have an answer to it. And again, I like Chiefs fans. I think they're a very opportunistic bunch. Their vitriol comes towards Cincinnati and Buffalo because obviously Kansas City's still a top dog. But they were saying, well, Jerick McKinnon will stop him. And I said, hold on a second. I love Jerick McKinnon as a pass blocker too. He ain't blocking Son Reich. And you really want to take Jerick McKinnon out of the passing game because Andrew Wiley can't get the job done?
Well, listen, they're going to have to find someone to help. I don't know if he's going to if they try to do what San Francisco did last week and use a one-on-one with a running back, or they were using a wide receiver in motion. That's not going to work. So yeah, I mean, and McKinnon's an interesting factor in the pass game. Pacheco in the run game, Pacheco runs so hard. He's a guy that just constantly keeps his motor. He's a huge Eagles fan, Pacheco. He grew up in Vineland here. And he's a huge Eagles fan. So this is a very weird moment, and you're thinking about like, here's this kid. He's a rookie in the 7th round. He gets into the Super Bowl. He's playing against the team, but he's a kid that can really run hard. And I'm interested to see. Andy Reid for 14 years had the media asking him, "Hey, are you going to run? Are you going to run?" What if he pulled out the run game and said, "Hey, Philadelphia, I finally ran it right down your throat"? I don't think that would happen. I can't imagine he's going to take the ball out of Mahomes' hand in a game of this size. But that's another guy. Pacheco is another weapon.
Do you think Andy Reid and the way he prepares for a game, do you think that can be the equalizer in terms of the talent differential?
Yeah, I mean, look, we know Andy's record off of a bye. This is essentially a bye, so he is very well prepared. I don't think this, somebody asked me this. I was on a station the other day, and they were asking me about Andy in terms of how much of a factor is the coaching. And he said, well, Andy will have the team prepared. The question will be if the game is close. Andy has had his time management issues in the past. That might be where Andy would be a bigger factor in terms of them losing the game. I think if they win the game, it's because they're very well prepared, very well coached, but they could also lose the game if it's a close game. And that element, it's much like Shanahan. Shanahan's a good in-game play caller and designer, all that kind of stuff. But when he has to call timeout and they have to manage the game, that's where he is at his weakness. So if the Eagles can get Andy into that situation, then they should have a little bit of advantage, because the Eagles, I think Nick Sirianni does a great job at managing clock, using his timeouts and all that stuff.
What I get upset is when Reed gets his vitriol as criticism. And it ain't just from Eagles fans. It's everybody else. Well, Andy Reid only has one championship. Or look at Andy's record in conference-style games and Super Bowls. I said, well, you got to get there. You guys act like he's losing to inferior opponents here.
Sometimes he has, though.
Yeah,
but,
he has at times. But
yeah, I mean, Carolina was an inferior opponent. Tampa Bay was an inferior opponent. I think Arizona, I don't know if it was an inferior opponent. They were probably on the same level, but they had just beaten them Thanksgiving night very handily.
But what we talked about earlier, they were also on the road in that game.
Just saying, I mean, he's had moments where they've had a chance. I think the one game that stands out that they probably weren't an underdog was the Ram game. Other than that, I think they were probably the favorite almost every single time that they had played a game. Look, just if people act like you have one Super Bowl and then that's a deterrent, you know how hard it is to win the Super Bowl? I mean, you know how hard it is to be the last team standing? What has to go your way? What has to happen? And when you play a team on one day, and that's the one day, this is what we talk about all year. Well, they beat so-and-so, and this team lost to them, and you lost to them. Nobody cares. You shouldn't care. What you do on any Sunday is completely irrelevant to what happens on the day when you play that team and what matchups they have and what scheme they run and versus what you run. I mean, people get so wrapped into, well, how do you lose to this team? Well, on that day, they had a good game plan. You didn't. Over 17 games, you have a bad week. This is the day that you can't have a bad day, right? And Andy has had some bad days on this day and in the championship round in the past. So, Yeah, I mean, Andy, I think is great. I think Andy's a top 5 guy probably of all time when it comes down. And by the way, when it's all said and done, he's an unbelievable story. I mean, this is a guy that nobody thought of when the Eagles hired him. Would he have been a head coach down the road? Maybe. I mean, how many quarterback coaches back then? Now, today, because of Andy's almost a trailblazer of these guys getting job opportunities without being head coaches ever, because of guys like Andy Reid, who was never a head coach, never a coordinator,
never a play caller.
Never. And now he's turned into one of the greatest head coaches of all time.
Yeah. This is what upsets me with Reid's career with the Eagles. The great Jim Johnson, who I love, by the way, and I loved his defensive philosophy at the time, but Bill Belichick exposed it. John Fox exposed it. John Gruden exposed it. Hey, what happens when we actually beat that blitz? Well, Joe Jurevicius is running 70 yards. Or let's run a screen pass to Corey Dillon because Hugh Douglas and Javon Kerr and Darwin Walker are too stupid to realize that, we're just going to flip it over to Corey Dillon, or, the Jake Delhomme dump off. It's teams found ways to beat that. And I actually think the guy who started that trend was Kurt Warner in that 2001 NFC Championship game. I'm not blaming the defense for that one because the Rams were the greatest show on turf. But Kurt Warner said, hey, you know what? They got to me the first time they played me in 2001. I got something for them, and it's called Marshall Faulk. And I think teams copied that with the short game.
Yeah, well, and I think back then, look, the Eagles had Donovan McNabb and not much else. And their defense. The defense is what, in reality, people don't like it because they love Jim Johnson. And you're right. They had some fun defenses, but they weren't championship defenses. In the end, they lost games because their defense just simply wasn't good enough. They got exposed in bigger games. Their offense was never their bread and butter. Their offense was there, like Donovan McNabb, run around, make a play or two. And our defense, I used to do a show with Darwin Walker, and he would tell me all the time, Jim Johnson's philosophy was, I don't care how many yards we give up, 17 points. That's the number. Yeah. 17 points. Give up as many yards as you want. I don't care. 17 points. And if we give up 17 points, we'll win. In other words, Donovan will run around and make enough plays that if we give up 17 points, we'll win the game. That was their philosophy. Well, you can't win like that in big playoff games with the defense against better teams and better coach teams. They start to see things that we're going to get more than 17 points on you. And normally, in the end, the defense gave up a big play or two that cost them in those bigger moments. So there was a lot of and look, you could blame Andy a little bit because he was so stubborn early in his career not to get a wide receiver. They finally go out and get T.O., and voila, they're now an offensive team more than a defensive team.
Yeah, and I think that was always frustrating too. Like, Andy wouldn't get a wide receiver. He's like, well, we'll win a lot of games with James Thrash and Todd Pinkston. Why would I switch? Or, we got Pro Bowl tight end Chad Lewis. We have this good offensive line. We have this good running game. Oh, by the way, we probably have one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the league in Donovan, who's just a playmaker. But watching those 0-1, 0-2 Eagles, and the 0-2 Eagles offense was actually really good. But you could tell if you stop Donovan, you stop that team. And I think people got the fool's gold that when Donovan was out, they could win without him because they did win with Coy Detmer and A.J. Feely. And then you realize, okay, hold on a second. Yeah, the defense got to do everything. And it all came to a headway in the NFC Championship game. And it's a shame because it defined Andy's legacy here. It defined Donovan's legacy. It still defines Donovan's legacy to the fact where fans don't think he's any good, and he's the winningest quarterback they've ever had. Now, Jalen Hurts might be changing that.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan was – I think Donovan the clear picture of Donovan, what could have been to win people over, is if he had a receiver to play with. He had 1 year where he had a receiver, and he was pretty much an MVP candidate. I mean, it was the best year he had. People talk about Donovan was inaccurate. Donovan
they all were at that time.
What's that?
They all were. Everybody except Kurt Warner was inaccurate.
Right. Well, Donovan was like a 58% passer. And then, voila, he got Terrell Owens, and he was a 65% passer. You give me a guy to throw the ball to where I don't have to be perfect every single – now, I'm not saying McNabb was, Kurt Warner accuracy. I mean, we all know he had some of the low throws here and there. but he never got any help. I mean, you had to throw the ball right in the guy's chest for one of these guys. You throw the ball to Owens, and all of a sudden he goes from 58% to 65%. I mean, that's a huge, huge jump in terms of how many more plays. I think if McNabb had a guy to play with over the course of his career, we would be talking about a guy who was just probably Hall of Fame slam dunk. I mean, now he's probably borderline more on the no side. But he would be a slam dunk Hall of Famer if he had a guy to play with. And look what it's done for Hurts. Let's not act like, well, if you're great, sometimes you need help. Michael Jordan needed Scottie Pippen, right? Like Hurts has turned the corner and taken such a big jump, in part because he's his work ethic and he worked at being great. But he could be the same player right now. But if he doesn't have A.J. Brown making plays for him, you got to have somebody down the field to make the play. You might put the ball in the perfect spot, but if that throw is to Jalen Reagor, he's not making that play, right? You need that guy to be on the other end of the catch to make it all work. Hurts put in the work to make the throw, put it where it needs to be, but the guy has to make the play on the other side. And that's what getting A.J. Brown has done for Hurts. And I think if McNabb would have had a player of that magnitude, we'd be talking about a way different story for Donovan.
And this is what I think Andy fell into the trap too. Well, the Patriots are winning Super Bowls, and they have David Givens and David Patton and Christian Fauria and like not big names playing wide receiver, but we saw what happened when Tom Brady got Randy Moss. He went from
Another example.
Yeah. He went from, I can only throw 25 to 30 touchdowns a year to throwing 50. Yeah. That's how good Tom Brady actually was. Like, we always want to criticize Brady for being a game manager, which wasn't a bad thing, but he never had anybody. And like you said, when Donovan got T.O., things changed. Peyton Manning always had Marvin Harrison. Well, okay, we'll add Reggie Wayne to the mix too. We'll get him in there. I used to criticize Kurt Warner all the time because you didn't have those number one wide receivers. I'm like, hold on a second. This guy got Marshall Faulk. He got Isaac Bruce. He got Torrey Holt. He should be putting up those numbers. But then when you rewatch those old Rams games, Kurt Warner was pretty good. He could get the ball right where they needed to be.
Yeah, and Warner, a lot of the like back then, if you remember, Warner played in the Arena League, and people were crediting the Arena League, and we were wondering if there was going to be like an influx of Arena League quarterbacks because of how fast he got the ball out. Because in the Arena League, you had to get the ball out so fast, that people were wondering, man, he gets the ball out so fast. Is that because of him playing in the Arena League? He was just such an accurate thrower, Warner, man. He just put the ball. Like, if you think about it too, though, Isaac Bruce was an interesting guy. He kind of came out of nowhere. Like, he was like, who the hell's this guy, Isaac Bruce, all of a sudden, one of the best receivers in the league? Torrey Holt was a high draft pick, NC State. Like, he was a guy that I think was like a top 10 pick that you were kind of thinking was going to be great. But Isaac Bruce came out of nowhere too, and that kind of coincided with when they changed their offense. Mike Martz's offense was more predicated to throwing the ball. And look, I guess looking back on it, we were seeing the crossover of a run-dominated game to a now pass-dominated game. So we were seeing the early stages of the game kind of changing when we were so used to seeing teams run. And, if you needed to get that running back and people signed and draft, go back to those drafts. People were drafting running backs in the first round, like that big time. You don't see that at all anymore. Maybe one guy a year, a running back gets drafted in the first round, if that. But we were starting to see the beginning of it, and it kind of started with those Rams teams.
Well, look at 1999, for example. Like, Angelo led Eagles fans to wanting to draft Ricky Williams because he was Heisman Trophy winner, record setter. And I'm 11 years old. I wasn't even 11 yet. I was 10. But again, watch a lot of football. And I'm going to myself, hold on a second. Didn't do Stanley run for 1,000 yards last year? Like, the Eagles never have a quarterback. Why don't they go get one of them?
I got a story for you on that. So that year, 1998, I am an intern at what was then 610 WIP. And part of my internship job was to call the people that were part of this Dirty 30. I had to call them and say, hey, this is 610 WIP. You need to be at the bus to go to the thing. So I was there interning when that all went down.
How about that? So you got to talk to Kenny and all those guys, huh?
I guess I don't remember who was in the Dirty 30, but I do remember assembling the list of people and calling them to confirm that they were showing up.
Oh man, I can't
Not
imagine.
a bright spot of my career.
Yeah, man, you always put on the resume, Mike Gill.
Well,
Anyway,
I was a big McNabb guy. I was a huge McNabb fan. I watched him at Syracuse. I went to West Virginia. He smoked us every time we played them. But I loved McNabb. I think McNabb gets a bad rep. Now he's kind of done some of this stuff to himself. He's not
Yeah,
the
he
most,
did.
But that being said, I loved him as a player, and I always felt that if they gave him some more weapons, that we probably would have saw. He would have been much more appreciated.
I think the standard we have now for the Eagles would have happened 20 years ago. That's what I think, and they would have continued with this group right now. But anyway, Mike Gill, running short on time here. Love having you come on. I actually thought you were in Arizona today. That's why I wasn't going to bug you, but I guess we're both going tomorrow, and we're going to have a good time this week.
Yeah, I'll be landing tomorrow night about 10:15. So we'll see you probably Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll catch up.
Yep, sounds good. If you need me on the Sports Bash Live with you, just let me know. I'm sure I'm going to be at Radio Row a bunch of times this week.
Yeah, I'll text you.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Mike.
See ya.
All right, Mike.